Alright, YouTube, we're back. We're talking some Square Enix. We're talking Final Fantasy and Square Enix's interest in potentially returning to turn-based. Or at least that's what the headlines are saying. That's not necessarily what their answer is. They're asked a question at the recent shareholder meeting that happened in the last day or so. Specifically, Clair, Obscur, Expedition 33 is mentioned by the person asking the question. And Square Enix did mention being aware of the game because, I mean, obviously they are. How could they not be? A very successful turn-based RPG. And that this style of game is kind of the foundation of Square Enix. Also, within this particular question and answer, they kind of lay out their 3-year plan again, the reboot that they're doing, which I think they did last month in May, but we just didn't cover it for some reason on the channel. So first off, we're going to read Genki's coverage of this, and then I actually want to read the person's tweet who actually got to ask the question, because there's kind of a lot to it that Genki doesn't really cover. Square Enix reportedly say they are aware of Expedition 33 and that they value turn-based RPGs. At the Square Enix shareholders meeting, one investor said they would like the new Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy games to be turn-based and highlighted Expedition 33's success as an example. Square Enix responded that they are aware of Expedition 33 and believe that command-based RPGs are the origin of Square Enix. They value the genre of command-based RPGs and plan to continue delivering such games in the future. Genki did do a follow-up correction in that the person asking the question was not actually an investor, but an investment media reporter. Not that that necessarily changes anything. The question's the question, the answer is the answer. I guess technically an investor would have more stake in what Square Enix is doing, obviously, but it didn't really change anything. People writing these articles did any sort of surface-level research, they would have seen that Genki did a follow-up tweet clarifying that it doesn't mean like the next Final Fantasy is going to be turn-based. It's just they're going to continue producing turn-based RPGs like they already have been doing. I assume that's in reference to like the recent like Dragon Quest 3 remake and the upcoming 1 and 2 remake, and like Dragon Quest 11 was also turn-based. I assume 12 will be turn-based. Also, I believe the Bravely Default Flying Fairy like remaster, I think uses turn-based combat as well. So like that is something they've been doing for a while, and technically they never stopped doing because of the Dragon Quest series, but obviously people want them to return to the Final Fantasy series and do turn-based. Just a portion of people want them to do that. I don't personally care that much. Like I like them kind of innovating with the Final Fantasy games. Like a majority of people out there, I personally really love what they've done with the remake games, right? 16's combat was kind of whatever. It was definitely less interesting than 7 Remake, and I don't necessarily need another Final Fantasy like 16. But overall, the series, when you really look at it, hasn't been that turn-based. It's really like 1, 2, and 3 in like Final Fantasy X, right? Everything else is some iteration of ATB, which isn't truly turn-based. Kind of split hairs at that point, but it is kind of funny when people talk about the Final Fantasy series needing to return to turn-based, when it majority of the time in the franchise it really hasn't been. As for the 3-year plan thing, Genki says Square Enix again outlined their 3-year reboot plans to shareholders at the shareholder meeting according to one person in attendance. Shift from quantity to quality. From April 2025 to March 2028, plan to release major titles on multiple platforms. After the 3-year reboot, they plan to release major titles of key IP on a consistent basis. And then it says slide below for May 2025, Square Enix midterm business plan presentation. Yeah, this is something they discussed last month, but I guess they kind of re-upped on it with this recent shareholder meeting. But their plan is in the next 3 years, April 2025 all the way up to March 2028, to drop their major titles on multiple platforms. I would assume that would mean Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, Dragon Quest, and Nier. I think that's like their big 4 franchises, right? Like I don't know what else is like a major title beyond those 4 games, right? So that's not necessarily a surprise. We've already kind of seen that shift happening here lately with, 16 and 7 Remake coming to other platforms. Obviously, like the Dragon Quest games have come to other platforms too. Also, of course, the Nier games. There's obviously a level of exclusivity with some of these games throughout the years, but ultimately they have come to other platforms. Now, as we have talked about plenty of times on the channel, most likely when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, there is some sort of PlayStation exclusivity in place. More than likely. Maybe that could have changed over the last couple years or something, I don't know. But most likely this will be like PlayStation exclusive, at least for a little bit. We have seen the exclusivity windows shorten over time with, from Remake to 16 to Rebirth, and also how fast they come to PC. So even if there is some sort of exclusivity in place for the 3rd game, it might come to PC relatively quickly. Maybe what they're saying here with the multi-platform thing is that going forward, anything that doesn't already have some exclusivity in place might be day one on multiple platforms, maybe all the platforms, at the very least probably PC. Also, apparently after the 3-year reboot plan, they want to drop major titles in their key IPs more consistently, which is a little bit interesting. I do think you could do more with like the Final Fantasy games. Like, they don't do spin-offs super often for Final Fantasy, right? Like the last one was Stranger Paradise, which was a handful of years ago at this point. Not everything needs to be a numbered entry, right? So they could definitely do more with Final Fantasy. I believe the last one before Stranger Paradise was The City NT, which was a hell of a long time ago. And they do quite a bit of games with the Dragon Quest series, like Dragon Quest Builders and Monsters and other stuff like that. I don't know how successful they are necessarily, but they still do quite a bit with the Dragon Quest series. I'm not saying they need to like milk the other franchises, but they could definitely do more with Final Fantasy and like Nier. They try to do other shit with Kingdom Hearts, but that apparently gets canceled these days. For the person's tweet who actually got to ask the question, it's obviously in Japanese, it's auto-translated, but it's actually pretty damn good to auto-translate on Twitter for once. So they say, I had the opportunity to speak, so I expressed the opinion that I would like new releases of Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy to alternate. The reason is that I agree with the shift from quantity to quality in the medium-term business plan. On the other hand, I explained by citing the example of former President Wada, under whom Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest titles were not released for a long time due to an obsession with quality, and the example of the previous President Matsuda, who released too many low-quality games as a result of prioritizing quantity. I mentioned that prolonged development makes it difficult to attract fans, and if development costs become too heavy due to extended timelines, even new Dragon Quest games or Final Fantasy titles may fail to generate profits. Therefore, a balance between quality and quantity is essential. Above all, I emphasize the need to release the flagship titles Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy every year, which I sort of disagree with. Additionally, I expressed the desire for new Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy titles to be command-based RPGs, explaining this by referencing the shift in direction from Final Fantasy XVI and the success of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which gained attention in 2025. The response was that the next 3 years of the medium-term plan will focus on delivering truly interesting games to users. However, beyond that, they plan to deliver many titles, including mid-tier ones, and are preparing for this, so they asked us to wait for announcements. Regarding command-based RPGs, they are aware of Expedition 33 and consider command-based RPGs to be Square Enix's origin and foundation. They value the command-based RPG genre and plan to continue delivering games in this style in the future. Bit of a long read, but I kind of wanted to cover everything that they talked about, right? So as for the yearly release thing they mentioned with Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, that's probably like an auto-translate problem, because with the initial tweet that they're quote tweeting, they mention this, but they talk about it alternating between them. So like a Dragon Quest game one year, a Final Fantasy game next year, then Dragon Quest, then Final Fantasy, so on and so forth. I'm not really sure if they mean like a major title every other year, because that's not very realistic, right? Like Dragon Quest 12, and then like Final Fantasy 17 the next year, then Dragon Quest 13 the next year, and then Final Fantasy 18 the next year, right? That's just not really doable. We're talking about like small releases, spin-off games, that type of shit. That can definitely be doable every other year, roughly, especially if you have other studios working on them. Like if you don't just have like one studio doing Dragon Quest and one studio doing Final Fantasy, right? If you're switching off from like CBU 1 and 3 and maybe even fucking CBU 2, working on like some sort of a Final Fantasy spin-off, then you're rotating which studio's doing that, so they actually have more than 2 years to make the game. Maybe not the best example here, but kind of like what Activision used to do with the Call of Duty franchise, where it's like Sledgehammer and Infinity Ward and Treyarch kind of switching off every year on who was making the next Call of Duty game, right? So it actually gave each of the studios about 3 years to make the game. I haven't played it myself yet, but something like World of Final Fantasy comes to mind. Like that was a game that I've heard, decent stuff about. And like the Dissidia franchise is just sitting there waiting to be used. Like, why aren't we doing more with Dissidia? Why isn't there another Dissidia game? Dissidia NT was definitely underwhelming, but the previous Dissidia games were great. And we've had a couple of Final Fantasy games since the last Dissidia game, but also there's a shit ton of characters in each of the fucking games that have never been used, right? So you could do so much with the game. So much with that idea. Overall, though, just kind of get back to like the main point of the video, the turn-based discussion there with the Final Fantasy franchise. Like, I'm down for it. Like, I'm not against the idea of them doing another, Final Fantasy game that's turn-based. Do you do another numbered entry turn-based? Hard to say, because a lot of their, modern fans, if you want to call it that, are used to the more action style. But maybe they'd bring in a bunch of old school fans if they did, Final Fantasy 17 turn-based. There are plenty of fans out there too, like myself, that are just about always play the next Final Fantasy, right? It definitely has to look good. I don't just blindly give them my money, but I will almost always pick up the next one. Of course, that's where I pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts overall with this video? We talked about kind of a lot of different things here, but I guess ultimately, what are your thoughts on the Final Fantasy series potentially doing a turn-based game somewhere in the future? Anyway, though, that is the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Search in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @davidYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.